Hello everybody, welcome back to Future Fiber. This is your host Jenny, and this is a channel where we do crafty things, mostly knitting, and I am back with another knit and chat where I am knitting at the same time that I am chatting. My running theme with knit and chats is generally like me regurgitating information to you that you did not ask for. And this is definitely like a shower thought that should have stayed a shower thought, but I'm going to blast that out into the world because as a millennial, I feel compelled to overshare. The topic on hand today is a little bit related to oversharing because I want to talk about knitting and social media, but not in the way that maybe you would think. This kind of started off as me, before I actually start talking, I should talk about what I'm going to be knitting on and then actually knit while I'm talking. So today I have as my knitting project this moonset tee. In my latest podcast episode, I said that I'm now in the stockinette phase, so I can just go on this and it'll be pretty mindless while I spend my mind energies on talking about the topic at hand. So what got me started on this thought train, right, was the release of Threads on Instagram, which is basically like Twitter for Instagram. My day job, I work in tech. I'm a designer and I am in the realm of kind of app development, I guess. So this is just something that I think about even if I don't want to think about. And I was thinking about all the different knitting related applications that are out there. And by applications, I mean not just mobile. I'm talking about mobile and web apps, just websites. I feel like that's a general term used nowadays to just talk about anything that's has some sort of functionality and isn't just like a web page. With Threads on Instagram, it immediately saw this not necessarily migration, but adoption, where a lot of people I knew were signing up for Threads and opening their accounts and talking about it. There was a lot of hubbub. And I think coupled with Twitter and what's going on over there right now, and people in general losing a bit of trust, bit of interest in Twitter overall. Now you're seeing this attempt at user migration away from Twitter to other platforms, text-based platforms, like there's the older competitors like Mastodon, and there's also Blue Sky, which is just like Twitter 2.0, and now there's Threads. So you're seeing this, I guess we're in the middle. I mean, we'll see, but to me, it kind of seems like we're in this middle of a social media shift. And this has kind of happened in the past as well, right? You look at like MySpace and how there was a migration, or I guess there was Zanga as well, MySpace, Zanga, that era, and then you see that great migration over to Facebook. And then from Facebook, you kind of branched, I guess we kind of branched out into different social media networks that are kind of not really in the same playing field as Facebook necessarily. It's a different, to me, it feels like a different user target demographic, different purpose. Like Instagram you use for a different purpose than you would use Facebook. That was a long preface to how this relates to knitting. But I mean, I'm sure if you're a knitter, you do get targeted ads a lot for these different apps for knitters. They're mostly mobile apps, but I think some of those that come to mind is the Making app, the Knit app, I think that's what it's called. Aside from that, there's always been Ravelry, which started as a social media site, and it still has a social like network component to it. I think it mostly operates like a forum, which is a little bit different in purpose from how we define social media nowadays, I think. But it still had that purpose of like community and like sharing information with each other and having someone's page that you kind of follow and messaging in between those different users. So like I would say, at least in some aspects, Ravelry also fits that. Okay, well, here's all these new and upcoming apps. What would take for them to kind of succeed, right? What is like the differentiator that would make a bunch of people migrate? I don't personally use any of those other knitting social media apps. I don't use Ravelry for the social networking aspect either. And that's not, I think that kind of has to do a lot with how social media is structured nowadays, or how we consume content. The barrier to entry for non-text based social medias has always been really high compared to just simply text-based ones. The physical act of you taking a picture, editing that picture, thinking of a caption to put for that picture, or if it's a video, like filming the video, deciding what to film the video of, and then like posting that versus you just typing up some words and shooting it into the void is so different. I think the biggest thing with these kind of apps when they first start is they focus on user acquisition, or like just getting people to use the app, right? And then start posting anything. Because it's easy, okay, I wouldn't say it's easy, but with advertising and things like that, you could get people funneled in to the application, but if there's nothing there, people are not going to really stick around. So having enough content there that people can look at and interact with is pretty important for these, just any app in general. And I think that's really hard with social media apps. That's kind of why you don't see huge migrations like what's happening kind of with Twitter and Threads. You don't see that very often. Like we shifted away from MySpace to Facebook. And if you think about the reason why that might have happened is because, I mean, a lot of it is word of mouth, but Facebook's biggest thing was that it made it easy to find people that you could friend that you might know in real life. Like, I think that location aspect kind of played a big part into it. And I mean, like younger people are always early adopters of this stuff, and it's like if you know a friend that is on X platform, then it makes it easier for you to get onto that platform, or easier to be influenced into joining that platform, you know what I mean? With regular social media, there's like that aspect. Like if your favorite celebrities on Twitter, then you have a reason to get Twitter so that you can read what they're saying and follow them. And that was like how Twitter amassed its like following initially, right? Like through celebrities. And with Threads, it's easy because you already have an Instagram account. I think you have to have an Instagram account to have a Threads account. And so those are like linked together. So it's really easy for you to sign up. And it's also really easy for you to tell who within your following list on Instagram has Threads and choose to follow them. So there's that link that's already existing. You can already have a guaranteed content feed that you can look at when you join. And I don't think that's necessarily the case with a lot of these social media, like that's targeted especially towards knitters. And it's natural, right? Like you're already segmenting out the group from the larger, world population to like world population that likes knitting, which is, I mean, we don't know how large it is, but it's going to be a smaller subset than the entirety of the world, right? So you're already limiting your like max user base to that subsection. And then you have to have enough content on there, or have people on there that you want to follow and look at what they're making and things like that. And I think generally, like, patterns of behaviors around like how knitters use their knitting social media is, I think it is a little bit knitting social media is interesting because I do feel like because of the sharing of what you're working on aspect, there is generally more output, individual content output from people. And I definitely fall into that category despite me being a content creator. You post because you want engagement on your content. So if you make it look a certain way, you know that it's going to drive a little bit more engagement, and you might be unconsciously following the posting styles of like larger creators, and that's not a bad thing. It's just, that's just what happens when you attach numbers. Way to track how you think, how much appreciation you think your work is getting, even though we're all at the mercy of the algorithm, right? So I kind of went on that tangent there. But most user patterns of social media are people who browse. Like on Instagram, you have the greater audience of like people everywhere, all Instagram users who might not even be into knitting, that might be still interacting with your content. That also might motivate you more to post your work or content. And that makes it really difficult for you to migrate platforms. When you join like a new knitting social media app like Making or something, right? No knock on them, their Instagram like fire. But the app itself is kind of bare bones, and it's because they're startups. You start out with this like general idea like, oh yeah, it would be nice if we had a social media platform just for knitters or just for makers, and that might have worked in 2005, 2006 when Ravelry was coming up, because there wasn't anything like that was like centralized, and we didn't have such wide and varied social media ecosystems as we do now. So like if you wanted to talk about knitting online, where would you go? And it was like, oh, like Ravelry, of course. And now I think it's going to be honestly hard to see a material shift of users away from Ravelry unless something really terrible happens. There was that rebrand from Ravelry a couple years ago that did exclude people from using their platform, which I won't really get into here, but I feel like it didn't cause a mass migration of users away from the platform in a way that's really replacing it totally, and I guess that's what I mean by catastrophic event. Well, as I said, we're still in the middle of the Twitter user migration. So unless you have that kind of like bad press on that platform, and or you find a new social media vertical or way to engage with the same type of content, like I'm thinking how people really adopted TikTok. I think it's going to be pretty hard to navigate people away from Ravelry, because there's also this another aspect to user migration or like user adoption in general. And it's that the focal point of somebody deciding to download your app is if like it solves a need. I don't want to say problem because that just seems kind of negative, and I feel like that's an overused like term and rhetoric in like product development space. But I'm talking about like the place that Ravelry, at least, I mean, I don't have the data on this, so I have no idea, but the place that Ravelry holds in the community, knitting communities currently, is not simply social media. To me, its greatest strength is that it's had this archive of information and content that people have generated over the years, over the past, when did Ravelry start? Is that like 2015? Like almost a decade of information that people, no, it's more than that, eh? It's like 15 years of information that people voluntarily tagged and published and archived into Ravelry. And that's like what is the main driver for what for Ravelry's new user acquisition, I feel like. Because how it was introduced to me was that this is a place that you can go to get patterns, free patterns, get information about patterns, see a list of all patterns that a particular designer has made, directly purchase the patterns, so there's a marketplace aspect. And once you buy the patterns, it's saved in your library, so you have a library like archival aspect for yourself. And there's also, you know, like the primary functions of you logging your projects, but I feel like that's a little bit secondary, at least for me, because me logging projects happens in, you know, this form of YouTube, and it also happens in the form of Instagram. So that I admittedly don't update my Ravelry page that often. So you have, Ravelry has 15 years plus. I keep saying 15, that's, somebody correct me if I'm wrong about that, but they have that many years of content that people have voluntarily and individually contributed to the site. And you're never going to be able to compete with that as a new up and coming product geared towards knitters. So you have to fulfill a different need for this group, whether that be, I don't know, like providing some sort of way to log your progress in a easier way. That's just an example. If I had the business idea, I wouldn't be talking about this right now. I would be pitching to somebody. This is why I'm not a CEO. Yeah, it's just like, it's hard to compete with that, you know? So I do feel like maybe that's why these other knitting apps aren't taking off as much, because it's hard to convince people to generate content on there and to keep coming back to check out different things. And I think, like, I'm not really necessarily the type of person to think that, despite me being a designer, I don't necessarily think that good design is like a major draw for users. I think it's a very nice thing to have, and it makes your user experience, like, it makes people more likely to stay on your app, right? But it's not gonna ultimately convince them to use your app, if you know what I mean. Like, you need the feature before you can convince people to stay with good design. And I think that's like one of the proposed benefits to the different up and coming knitting social media apps or knitting focused apps. Like it's like, oh, this is an easier way to log your project. This is a more user-friendly way to talk to other knitters or etc. But I mean, if there's no knitters on there to talk to, then you're not gonna adopt. That's why I think it'll be kind of hard for a new knitting focused product to really kind of take off, unless they solve a need that us as a collective group just haven't thought of yet. And when that day comes, we'll all know about it because we'll already be on it. But yeah, it's good that there's enough interest from knitters and people to, make these applications and put them out there into the world. Like, it's good that people are creating things and seeing how they do. But for there to be like a seismic shift away from Ravelry and just regular social media to a kind of a niche social media, like some of these knitting apps, it's going to take a lot. And that's just like what I was thinking about in the last week or so. Okay, hello. It is later in the day and I am back because I had something to do, so I had to kind of cut it short there, but I was thinking back about what I was saying and I wanted to add a couple more things because I guess I was worried about a couple things. Like, I didn't want this conversation, or I say conversation, it's just me talking, but I don't want this video to come across as negative or like prohibit anyone from, if you had this idea of making a knit-based application or social media app or knitting related anything on the internet. Like, I don't want to discourage anybody from doing that because I think it's ultimately good that that even these things are happening, right? Like, I think there have been knitting related things that come and go, and it's just, it's part of experimentation, and the fact that it even exists is, I think, overall a testament to how invested somebody is in knitting to want to start a business, a community around the topic and to actually execute it. I like working in that space. I know that it's like a ton of work, and to be a founder or to kind of do that, once you get to a certain size, you do have to worry about like profit or revenue or whatever. But most of these initiatives are still like in the beginning stages, and all of that is kind of fueled, I would hope, I would think, is to a large effect fueled by like their passion for knitting and crafting, which I think is like a really good thing. So I don't want to like neg anybody if you had like the next best, and obviously like I'm just some girl on the internet, so I don't think I'm going to like dissuade anyone really from chasing their dreams of becoming an app founder. But it was just like I kind of got set on that thought pattern, I guess, because I just of like the current events. Something else that I also wanted to say about certain knitting apps that I saw was that they are starting to branch off into kind of marketplace, or having a focus on the marketplace aspect before the social media aspect. I think Knit App is a good example where they are proactively reaching out to certain designers to have their already established like knitwear designers to have their patterns be, I don't think it's exclusive, but to be featured on their apps. And they're running promos as well to kind of entice users to to entice knitters to join. And that's a pretty, like, that sounds like a pretty solid business approach, right? Like you're providing something that people will have immediate value, right? Like if you're a fan of that particular designer and the app is running a promo where if you sign up for their app, you get a free pattern. Like that's like a pretty good way to show value and also like get user acquisition from a business standpoint. But yeah, I feel like the social media aspect, even for Ravelry, is like pretty, has been kind of sidelined because it's really difficult to compete with existing social media platforms out there because they're so optimized for content discovery and like creation that I do feel like it'll be really difficult for knitting focused apps to solely be centered around community and social media. Kind of as sad as it is, I don't think this is just limited to knitting, right? This is like any subculture or any singular hobby or interest-based social media platforms all suffer from this. And that doesn't mean there's no community, right? Like just because you don't have a specific focused app doesn't mean you don't have that community of hobbyists and crafters and knitters and things like that. So it's just interesting to see where the trend is. And it is pretty unusual for knitting to have such a central and very global presence on the internet in one place. So I think in that aspect, Ravelry is very very unusual. And they're also profitable. From their website, they said that they've been in the black since pretty early on in their years. And I think that has a lot to do with like the marketplace aspect where they're probably charging sellers a fee, the designers a fee for every transaction that gets made. I don't actually know because I only released one free pattern. And so there's that, but also they have like ads as well. So I'm sure they generate revenue off of that. Like it's, I'm of two minds about like that kind of stuff. I think, I mean, a business is a business and you do need to be able to pay like people to be able to provide service and also like pay for hosting and things like that for a app with a large user base and traffic. So I do think, charging people or collecting payments or having a subscription service is not like bad because like, yeah, you need to make money, But I think I like to think a lot of these community-based social media apps and projects come out of like more altruistic starting places than, I don't know, like a new streaming platform or TikTok, that was a product designed with profit in mind. With all this being said, I don't use Threads and I don't use Twitter. I just think like this is a tangent for sure, but I think with text-based social media apps, I said this a little bit earlier, but with text-based social media apps, it's so much easier to just stream of consciousness, blast out into the void, and I don't think that's a good thing. Like, sure, it's interesting. It could be interesting. And I think there's a lot of content on Twitter or like maybe Threads, I don't know, I'm not on there, that people spend a lot of time kind of crafting and putting thought into. I don't think for the average person, it's like generally, I mean, depends on, I guess, how you approach it, but I generally don't, I think it creates a lot of regret in people. So, like, you see this on Facebook a little bit too. I'm sure you've seen some posts that you feel like are like, wow, they're really oversharing, huh? And that's just so much easier to do when it's completely text-based or like mostly text-based. Like, it's not that it's not impossible on photo or video focused social media platforms, just that if you're typing and not having to film yourself or take a video or take a picture, it's going to be much easier to create regrets. So, I mean, that's mainly why I don't use Threads. And then there's like other things that I won't get into, but sorry, you're not going to be really seeing future fiber on Threads. But it's like, what are you going to get from me? I already shitpost enough in Instagram stories. So it's like, it'll be, you'll get a text version of me talking about knitting. Like, what fun is that? So anyway, that's just like my general thoughts. This was really rambly and I don't know how this is going to do or edit down. But we'll see. Hopefully that was interesting. I don't know. I'm curious on your thoughts. Do you use other social medias? What's your general approach? Have you used these other knitting focused apps? What's your opinion on them? Maybe there is one that everybody uses that I just don't know about yet and I haven't explored, but I've downloaded a lot of them and I've looked at a lot of them. So let me know what you think and I will see you guys next week. Oh, and you can't tell, I made progress though, so okay, bye.